Hi, my name is Stefan Esser. The power of personal choices is an often overlooked and underappreciated component of health. Here at RestoreHealthUSA.com, we believe that education empowers individuals to live more vital lives. Today I want to share with you a PowerPoint titled The Power of Prevention. It explores the changing state of health and healthcare in America, and it reviews some basic studies on the power of personal choices to prevent and reverse common metabolic diseases. I hope you'll enjoy it and share the information with friends and family. But most importantly, I hope that you'll apply the knowledge to your daily life. The power of prevention is in your hands. As I put together thoughts for today's discussion, I came across an old article I had from Discover magazine. It describes the work of two researchers at Duke University that worked with agouti mice, a type of genetically modified mouse that has a defect near to the leptin pathway. As a result of this defect, all the mice have a much higher rate of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, etc. Well, these guys thought, what will happen if we feed the mice methyl donor groups while they're pregnant? Things such as methionine, choline, and B12. What will happen? Well, lo and behold, all of the baby mice were brown, were slender, and had none of the risk of the parent mice, which were all gold in color and had all the risks of metabolic disease and cancer. This is something we now know is called epigenetics, the way in which personal choices that an individual makes, as well as environmental exposures, can alter the very DNA that they're born with. Fascinating topic, and a little simple animal model that I want to keep in the back of our minds as we go through today's discussion. So today I really want to achieve some pretty big objectives. They're to provide you a snapshot of healthcare, to explore the growth of lifestyle disease, to address some common misconceptions, uncover some challenge, and offer some concepts for us for change. We're going to go through things in a very stepwise progression in a way that seems to make sense to me, and I hope will both make sense to you and challenge you in some ways. So let's start at the very beginning. That old crazy Greek, Hippocrates, had it pretty right when he said that, quote, the function of protecting and developing health must rank even above that of restoring it when it's impaired. This preventive model, unfortunately, is not at the top of our radar screen today. I think of American healthcare today like this picture. The faucets of disease are wide open, the sinks are overflowing with number after number of miserable and horrible disease processes. But we spend most of our time mopping up the floor, never really putting our hands to the faucets. Dean Ornish says it in a similar way. He says that we're like a mountaintop on which lots of cars fall over the edge of the cliff, but instead of building guardrails, we spend all our money on ambulances and hospitals at the bottom of the cliff. It certainly doesn't make a lot of sense. Today I hope that I'll present to you something that does make more sense. In America today, I believe that we spend too much and we apply too little to prevention, and we are in fact dying by our knives and our forks. So let me explain what I mean. In America today, the most common causes of death are heart disease, stroke, cancers, diabetes, kidney disease, all of which we know are very strongly linked to personal choices. When you look at the commonest causes of preventable death, it becomes even more apparent, where we can see tobacco and lack of activity and bad diet and alcohol consumption alike being the leading promoters of preventable death in America. Many of you have seen these slides that are moving in across the screen. They're from the CDC, and they show, by color, the change in the rates of overweight and obesity in America. And for the first time, now that greater than 70% of Americans are overweight or obese, adiposity, if you will, has surpassed smoking as a leading cause of preventable death in America. Now, the problem with being overweight is not that you die from jiggling. It's not that it doesn't look good. These don't matter to us as clinicians, as physicians, or they're certainly not at the top of our list of concerns. But all of these associated pathologies, this is what concerns us as physicians. Because obesity is linked to increased rates of everything from hypertension and stroke to impotence and a host of hormonally responsive cancers that you can see on the right. All of these come with obesity. Today in particular, we're going to use diabetes and metabolic syndrome as models of how lifestyle intervention can transform all of these associated pathologies. So why is this important? Well, in particular, type 2 diabetes is clearly linked to visceral adiposity and to BMI. Your risk of type 2 diabetes increases by 300% if you're overweight, or by 900% if you're obese, more than any other particular risk factor. So as you can see the rates of type 2 diabetes increasing over the last 25 years, you'll appreciate that they mirror the increases in adiposity. There's a direct correlation, one that is unarguable. Now, this is both concerning at the personal level, but also at the societal level. Because with over 21 million Americans now having diabetes, and the healthcare of these individuals being 2 to 3 times those without diabetes, it's easy to see why the projected costs are so astronomical. In fact, 1 in 3 children born in 2000 will develop diabetes in their lifetime, so you can appreciate what an immense cost this will be to our nation. To put that into perspective, for those of you who are like myself, not the best with numbers when they're just given raw, the cost of type 2 diabetes care in 2005 exceeded the entire budget of the Department of Education. So that's 1 out of every $8 spent in healthcare was spent to treat type 2 diabetes. That's an amazing amount of the overall healthcare spending. Now, when you look at the projected prevalence rates, meaning the total number of type 2 diabetes in America, you can appreciate that dramatic rise that is projected to occur over the next 20 to 50 years. So now calculate the cost of that, and you can appreciate why this is unsustainable in our nation. Now, if we only spend a lot on diabetes care, we might survive. But as you're all too well familiar with, the sufferings and the struggles of healthcare, with more than 17% of our GDP being spent on healthcare, it's just not sustainable. Now that number is just a number for most of us, but when you compare it to the expected rise over the next 50 years, you can see just how dramatic the spending is anticipated to be. But, are we really alone in this? That's really the question we should be asking, because maybe this is just part of being human. But when you look at the global economies, you can see that we outspend every nation on earth. To put it a little bit more in perspective, take a look at this slide. Here you can see that we spend twice as much as Canada, 3 times as much as Britain, with more than 60% of it privately funded. In fact, we spend so much that you would expect we got a lot for what we spend. But when you really rank us, according to the World Health Organization, we're 37th, behind such notables as Oman and Portugal. When you compare us to even just our neighbor to the north, Canada, and you look at simple concepts of health, such as infant mortality and life expectancy, you can see that we rank miserably, and yet we outspend significantly. So something's not jiving, something's not working. And part of it is that we're spending a huge and inordinate amount of money on chronic disease. More than 75%, in fact, of healthcare costs are spent on chronic disease. So many of these chronic diseases are metabolic diseases, and in particular metabolic syndrome. You can see we spend 4 of every $10 spent on prescription drugs to treat high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and blood sugar. Together, these constitute something we call metabolic syndrome. And it's really a correlation of physiologic changes, including a waist circumference that's increased, triglycerides that are increased, HDL that's low, blood pressure that's elevated, and fasting glucose that's up. We're going to talk more about that soon, but knowing that more than 25% of Americans have this conglomeration of symptoms should be concerning to all of us, because later we're going to talk about what they really stand for, these numbers. So, in perspective, we spend a lot, and yet we're one of the sickest, most obese, over-medicated societies on earth. The next question, of course, that comes to mind should be, how did this happen?